Alright, so I actually had to delay this video because I had so much fun just playing the build that I didn't finish the edit on time. See, Harrow has always been one of the best Warframes in the entire game. But since the recent shield buffs, he got even crazier. So, in today's Warframe guide, I will show you this super busted red crit setup right here. But not just that, we're also going to go over which Helminth options are great for Harrow, which companion you should choose, and most importantly, which weapons are the most lethal in his hands. As always, big shout out to all my generous channel members who help me keep the lights on. And now, let's jump right into it. In order to understand how Harrow can be so absolutely broken, we first have to take a look at his skills and see what his abilities even are. Starting out as per usual with his passive, which is actually a really nice one, because not only does it provide up to 200% overshield capacity, granting him up to 2,400 overshields on top of his normal shields, but it also makes that you start your mission already with your maximum energy, so no pesky energy consumables needed. Harrow's one is called Condemn, and what it does is it shoots out a sort of wave of chain energy that pins enemies to the ground where they stand, stunning them in a position where their head is perfectly exposed to give them headshots. And as we're going to see here in a second, this comes in very conveniently. Also, for every enemy that you hit with these chains, you get a portion of your shields back, and if your shields are already full, it turns into overshields. Now, most people might overlook this ability because it seems so absolutely standard. You know, you get a bit of shield and the enemies are stunned, nice, but what's so special about it? However, especially as you get into higher level content, you know, maybe Steel Path, this becomes an absolutely vital ability, because not only does it stun normal enemies, no, this one is also capable of stunning acolytes that visit you in your Steel Path missions in place, so they get stunned just like normal enemies, which is extremely nice because, you know, acolytes do have the ability to interrupt your skills and be a huge pain for a lot of Warframes out there. With Condemn though, this is not going to be your problem. It also has an augment, but I think outside of pre-made multiplayer teams, this one will not have much use. Skill number 2, Penance. This one does a whole lot of things. Once you cast it, Harrow sacrifices the shields that he currently has. The more shields he has, the longer the duration of this ability will be, capping out at a maximum of 120 seconds. While Penance is on, you get a metric buttload of buffs. First of all, whenever you hit an enemy, you get healed a little bit. In addition, you receive a massive fire rate and reload speed buff for your guns, as well as a melee attack speed buff. This skill is really the entire package of buffing potential, and you want to make sure that this one is pretty much on all the time. His 3 goes by the name Thurible, and with it, you can regenerate your energy. First off, once you cast it, Harrow starts consuming down his own energy, while a little number in your HUD starts ticking up. If you then tap the ability button again, or you wait until all of your energy is consumed, the counter will then stop, and from that moment on, whenever you kill an enemy, this is how much energy you get back from that. And, as if that's not enough, if you score a headshot kill, you get a multitude of this energy back. So, with Thurible, you're basically completely energy autonomous and don't need any other way of energy regeneration. Also, Thurible has an augment, but just like with Condemn, I don't really think there is much use for it. And last, but definitely not least, we have his big impressive 4, the skill that everybody loves him for, and the skill that gives him metric buttloads of crit chance: Covenant. The premise of this is pretty simple. Once you tap it, you get invincible for a short period of time, and while you're invincible, any incoming damage is going to be recorded in this little counter there, and once the invincibility phase is over, you get a crit chance buff based on how much damage you've eaten in your invincibility phase. Now, this buff caps out at 50% crit chance, and if you score a headshot, the whole thing is going to be quadrupled, so your maximum would be 200% crit chance on a headshot. But the cool thing about this is that while in super early game, it might actually be difficult to receive so much incoming damage that you actually get to the maximum of 50%, the further you get into the game, the easier it's going to become to eat enough damage in order to cap out this skill. I mean, like in Steel Path, basically one Grineer coming around the corner and shooting you once would already be enough to cap this one out. Now, 50% crit chance, you know, sounds all nice and well, but here is the really important part about this skill. The crit chance buff that this provides is a final multiplier. So even if your weapon has 0% crit chance, unable to crit at all, with this skill on, just like with Arcane Avenger, you would still have 50% crit chance, and on a headshot, even 200. So at the end of the day, the buff that this ability provides is so absolutely mental that you can get up into the multiple tiers of red crits with it. Now, one quick last word, this ability also has an augment called Lasting Covenant, but in contrast to the other previous two augments, this one is actually really good, because what it does is, whenever you headshot kill an enemy, the duration of your crit buff will extend itself for another couple seconds, so basically when you play this right, the buff is never gonna run out throughout the entire mission. And this is also what I previously mentioned with his first being very convenient in the way that it pins the enemies down with their heads exposed, because you can stun them with your one and then take all the time in the world to give them the neat little headshots that you need. Now, before we jump into the builds, I want to take one quick minute to talk about his actual gameplay and his gameplay loop, because in contrast to other frames, for Harrow, it's actually really important that you cast his skills in the right rotation, because if you get caught with your pants down, then you're going to find yourself wiped off of the map in just a split second. So here's how you're going to do it. Once the mission starts and you have the first enemy contact, you instantly want to cast his 4. This should be no problem because with his passive, you start the mission with your maximum energy restored already. Then, protected by the invincibility phase of his 4, you're gonna cast his 2 to sacrifice your shields and thereby gain the fire rate and self-healing bonus. Then, quickly cast your 1 to fill the shields back up before the invincibility time frame runs out, and with the rest of the energy that you then still have remaining, you cast your 3 and basically just let it run out until all your energy is consumed to give yourself the energy regeneration buff. Now, you're pretty much set up and ready to go. With the Lasting Covenant augment, your 4 should be on all the time throughout the entire mission, so you don't need to recast that. Use his 1 whenever your shield starts getting low, and finally, just recast your 2 and 3 whenever you feel the need to. Just one quick tip on the side, the mod Rolling Guard is very helpful to give you 3 seconds of complete invulnerability that you can use to safely cast your second skill and not have to worry about dying because you just got rid of all your shields. But alright, let's finally talk about the builds. And for this video, even though the red crit setup looks super duper crazy, I don't only have a late game Steel Path build, I also have an easy to put together budget build. So how about we take a look at this one first. Now, just to be clear, in order to even be able to farm Harrow, you gotta have the Chains of Harrow quest done, meaning at this point you are already well in your mid-game, so that's why our budget build right here is no super duper early game build, but one that you can put together once you're in the mid-game where you can actually farm Harrow. Just in case that you are a very fresh player who maybe got Harrow through the market, just throw on whatever mods you even have, because his kit is so self-sufficient that even with just a handful of mods, it shouldn't be that much of a big deal. But now, here goes our mid-game budget build. In the aura, you can use whatever you feel like. I personally went for Rifle Amp because I like to play Harrow with rifles, but you can go for whatever you please. Now, first off, let's go over how we keep Harrow alive. This one is actually pretty simple. Since we can basically regenerate infinite amounts of shields by just spamming our first skill, all we really need to do is put on redirection to increase our maximum shields, and then we benefit from a massive 2.5 seconds of invincibility once the shield breaks through the shield gating mechanic. In order to make sure that our 1 hits even enough enemies to fill up our shields to the max, we're gonna add Stretch for a little bit more range and Intensify for more ability strength, meaning more shields regenerated per enemy hit. Now, with Harrow, many people are tempted to build for as much ability strength as they can because they think that will give them more crit chance from his 4th skill. However, this is not the truth. No matter how much ability strength you have, his 4th skill will always cap out at 50 or 200% on headshot respectively, and no ability strength in the world can give you more crit chance. The way that ability strength interacts with his 4th ability is that the more strength you have, the less damage you need to take in order to get up to this maximum of 50%. However, once the enemies go above level 100, you basically don't need any strength at all for this anymore, because just a couple of shots will already get you over that threshold that you need for the maximum of 50%. So please don't worry about ability strength on Harrow. Then, in order to make sure that our skills just stay on a little bit longer, we go for Continuity for more ability duration, as well as Augur Message, which gives us another little duration buff. Augur Secrets, just to make sure that we really have enough strength to recharge our shields with the 1, Flow, because more maximum energy is always nice, and finally the Augment for his 4, Lasting Covenant, so with every headshot kill that we get, we extend the duration of our crit buff. If you want to, you can just use whatever Exilus mod you want. However, for the budget build, I just chose to leave it open. And if you already have arcanes, then pick whatever you like. But also here, on the budget build, we're not going to go with any of them. And just by the way, if you could maybe spare a like, that would be super duper helpful for the video because the YouTube algorithm loves this. So big cheers for your support. And now, let's take a look at the more advanced, super duper crazy red crit steel path build. Now, to be fair, this order right now might sound a little bit crazy, but to be able to understand the build itself, in this case, we actually have to take a look at the Archon Shards before the build. I promise you, this will make sense in just a couple of seconds. So, for the Archon Shards, I first went with 3 Tau Forged blue ones, all giving us more maximum energy, coming in at a total of plus 225. The reason I did this is so that we don't have to use a flow mod in the modding screen, and in addition I added 2 yellow ones giving us more casting speed, which also frees up 1 more mod slot that originally we would have used for natural talent. So with these 5 Archon Shards, we make space for 2 more mods of our choosing. And now, let's take a look at the mods themselves. Now, first of all, in the aura slot, there is only really one viable option, and that is Combat Discipline, giving us a little bit of damage whenever we score a kill. The reason we do that is Arcane Avenger, which is going to be our first arcane, that gives us another 45% crit chance bonus whenever we take damage. Just like the buff from our 4, also Arcane Avenger is a final bonus, meaning with our 4 on plus Arcane Avenger, we can get up to 95% crit chance added at the very end, meaning that even a weapon with 0% base crit chance can get a total of 95% crit chance just with that alone. And there's another nice fact about it, which goes as follows. See, many frames out there like the Combat Discipline Arcane Avenger combo. However, on most builds, you're forced to leave Combat Discipline at level 0 because otherwise the self-damage would be so high that you run the risk of killing yourself. And of course, with your aura mod at level 0 only, you miss out on a big portion of potential mod space, meaning you need to use more Forma, and that sucks. However, with Harrow, since his second skill heals you for every kill that you get, you can safely go and max out your Combat Discipline because whatever you lose in health from that, you're gonna heal 3 times over. So much for the aura. Let's now take a look at our survivability. Just like with the budget build, we go for redirection. However, in this case, since it's the high level build, we use primed redirection to give us even more shields. And since a higher shield cap means more shields will have to be regenerated from his first skill, we also need to make sure that we get a little bit more ability strength than the budget build, just to make sure that the couple of enemies we're gonna hit with the 1 will be sufficient to entirely fill up our shields. Therefore, we're gonna go with Umbral Intensify and Blind Rage to give us a decent chunk of ability strength. To make sure our 1 even hits enemies at all, we go with Overextended, giving us a massive chunk of range, and Prime Continuity, just so you know that our skills stay on for a little bit longer. Then, of course, just like with the budget build, Lasting Covenant as the augment for our 4, and that is basically it. Now, you might be wondering, Blacky, you still have 2 mod slots, the Exilus slot plus 1 arcane slot open. What's with that? Can't be that you just leave it free, right? And yes, don't worry, this is perfectly correct. We're gonna fill that up here in a second. However, what we have on screen right now, this is what I call the quote-unquote core of the build. These are the mods that you always want to have on your Steel Path Harrow, and depending on your personal preferences or if you want to use a Helminth skill or not, whatever you choose in the last 3 mod slots and the second arcane slot is up to your personal choice. However, here are some ideas from my side that I found really nice. Since Harrow has a lot of shields, and shields got even tankier over the last couple of weeks, he now is a very viable shield tank. And if you like the idea of turning your Harrow into a second Hildren, then what I would recommend is going with Adaptation, because the damage reduction from Adaptation not only works on health, but also on shields, giving your shields another layer of damage reduction. Also, since with the next update, Mirage's skill Eclipse will be a toggle, so you can always choose whether you want to have the damage reduction or the damage bonus, you can add that via the Helminth onto your Harrow so that the damage reduction from Eclipse stacks with the damage reduction from Adaptation, and both of that then stacks on top of your shield, making Harrow a super duper nice shield tank that can even rival the Queen in that regard, which will be Hildren. However, if shield tanking doesn't really sound all that nice to you, then leave out Eclipse and rather go with Rolling Guard instead of Adaptation. This one very nicely suits a shield gating approach. And for the rest of the mod slot, I had a really stupid but also super duper fun idea. Since Harrow is all about crits and we already use Arcane Avenger to even buff our crits more, how about we go even further into buffing our crits and look at the Vigilante mod set? As I'm sure most of you know, the set bonus of the Vigilante mod set is that whenever you score a crit, you have a chance that that crit is enhanced one level, meaning if you score a yellow crit, it has a chance to actually be an orange crit, if it's an orange crit, it has a chance to be a red crit, and so on. Now, with just 1 or 2 Vigilante mods, the chance that this is actually going to happen is quite low. However, if our entire setup has all 6 Vigilante mods installed, the chance of a critical hit to be enhanced will be a massive 60%. So what I did is I added Vigilante Vigor plus Vigilante Pursuit in the Exilus mod slot to give us 2 more Vigilante mods in the mix and reach that goal of a maximum of 60%. Don't worry, we'll get into where the other 4 Vigilante mods are here in a second. Just note that this is actually super duper funny. However, if you have other ideas what you want to do with these mod slots, then absolutely you do you. Finally, for the second Arcane slot, I personally went with Arcane Energize because, and that's what we're going to talk about right now, when you want to use a Helminth ability, then the only skill you can viably give up for that would be your third skill, which unfortunately is the one that gives you energy, so you need to make sure that your energy income comes from other sources. So I went for Arcane Energize in the Arcane slot. But yeah, now that we're already at the topic of Helminth, let's go and talk about which Helminth options would work nice on him. When it comes to the Helminth, what is really interesting is that Harrow's kit itself is so well-rounded that actually you don't really need anything from the Helminth at all. But if you want to experiment a little bit, of course there are a lot of options. As I just said, if you want to be shield tank in Harrow, then Eclipse would be your best choice. However, if you're more looking for a damage buff, then I would recommend going for Roar instead of Eclipse because Roar just is overall the most reliable and most consistent option here. Another super fun idea, especially if you want to go for explosive weapons for example, would be Energized Munitions, which comes from the Helminth directly, and it drastically reduces the ammo consumption of your weapon, making for example the Exceltra a very spammable explosive weapon. Super duper fun. My personal favorite is Ensnare from Korra because Harrow doesn't really have a grouping ability, and since we're already having quite a lot of range on our build, pulling enemies together is always a great choice, giving us more kills per minute. Also worth considering would be Thermal Sunder from Gauss because A, with the heat version of it, you can halve the enemy's armor, and second, with the cold version of it, you can not only slow down the enemies, which is nice for defensive purposes, but also enemies affected by cold take enhanced crit damage, so that too synergizes nice with Harrow's kit. However, while building your Warframe and getting your perfect Helminth skill are definitely nice and well, in order for this build to actually truly work to its maximum potential, and I absolutely don't want to understate this, you need to have the right companion. And I know companions always sound kind of unimportant, but in Warframe right now, companions make a huge difference, so let's take a look at the best companion options for Harrow. One super great choice would be an Adarza Kavat, because Adarza Kavats have access to the mod Cat's Eye, which gives you plus 60% crit chance. This works like Harrow's 4 and like Arcane Avenger, meaning it is also a final bonus, which, all things combined, can give you plus 155% crit chance as a final bonus. This is super crazy. Also, if you go for an Adarza Kavat, make sure that you have Tenacious Bond installed on it, because it gives you another 20% final crit damage buff, and in order to meet the 50% crit chance requirement that the mod has, just use the mod Bite on the Adarza and you will be fine. But the Adarza is not the only companion. You could also go and use a Sentinel, for example Worm Prime. Worm Prime is the only Sentinel in the game that has enough base shields that, with redirection, you get over 1200 shields, and having over 1200 shields means you can use a Reinforced Bond to give you plus 60% fire rate, which is also super nice, and from all the Sentinels, only Worm Prime can do that. However, while the Adarza Kavat and Worm Prime and potentially even Hounds from the Sisters of Pavos are all nice and well, my personal favorite is the Sentinel Diriga, and here's why. Being a robotic companion, Diriga has access to the mod Guardian. Guardian triggers whenever your shields go down to 0, and what then happens is the companion will instantly restore your shields back to full again. This mod has a 30-second cooldown. However, with the mod Manifold Bond, whenever you kill an enemy that has 3 or more different status effects applied to them, you reduce ability cooldown for your Sentinel by 3 seconds. Meaning, with this one, if you only get 10 kills with enemies that have status effects applied to them, your Guardian, which basically instantly refills your shields, will have recharged already. This way, your companion gets you in a loop of constantly refilling your shields so that you yourself don't even have to do that anymore, and you're pretty much invincible, untouchable, completely. Now, the reason we want Diriga to do this is because of Diriga's exclusive skill arc, Coil. What this does is it zaps nearby enemies and, with Manifold Bond, applies the different status effects that are on Diriga's weapon to the enemies while zapping them. This way, you ensure that the enemies will always have enough status effects on them to meet the requirement for the 3-second ability cooldown reduction. The rest of your Diriga build is basically up to personal preference. This here, for example, would be mine with one little flex slot there. And just like with the Adarza Kavat, also here we can use Tenacious Bond to get the final 20% crit damage multiplier. This is how it goes. As a Sentinel weapon, you either use the Volk Axe or the Volk Lock. These two are the only Sentinel weapons that have enough base crit chance that you can get them to over 50% using the mod Critical Delay. So if you pick one of them and then throw on Critical Delay, that means your crit chance of the companion will be above 50%, and therefore Tenacious Bond will be triggered, giving you a final 20% crit damage multiplier. And now that we're already talking about the companion weapon, remember how I equipped my Harrow with 2 Vigilante mods for the Vigilante set bonus, for the crit enhancing? Well, our companion weapon is going to be the place where we put the other 4 Vigilante mods, meaning Vigilante Offense, Vigilante Fervor, Vigilante Armaments, and if not already on your primary weapon, also Vigilante Supplies. And now, before we wrap things up, remember in the intro I promised you to also talk about which weapons work really nice in Harrow's hands, so let's take a look at that right now. Since Harrow gives you a whole lot of final crit chance that is independent of your weapon's base crit chance, Harrow can do absolute wonders for weapons that have a whole lot of crit damage, however only a low crit chance. Perfect example for this would be the Kuva Nukor, which has I think a 5 times base crit multiplier, which is super crazy, but only comes with 5% crit chance, therefore on any other Warframe it wouldn't be usable as a crit weapon. However, with Harrow you get so much final crit chance that you can turn your Kuva Nukor into a crit weapon, and it does absolutely tremendous amounts of damage, as you also see in the background right now. Same goes for the Babonico, which is also not a crit weapon, but somehow has a lot of crit damage, so Harrow really likes that. And of course, every weapon that uses Hunter munitions to inflict slash through crits is great in Harrow's hands, for example explosive weapons like the Exceltra, the Kuva Brahma, and everything else that goes into this direction. Now, if you like red crits, then Harrow is of course a great, but not the only option though. So if you enjoyed this build here, then you absolutely also shouldn't miss my super duper broken red crit Mesa right here. Another big shout out to Nielswy, Demon Lord Zell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Bland Waffle, Not Linux Gaming, Lycran Shepherd, Turtlepeer, Shadow Soul, JPT Cokeman, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.